Okay, we are live. I am here with Alexander Mercouris, the pixelated Alexander Mercouris, who will clear up as we go along. Alexander, how are you in London?
I'm very, the Oracle of Delphi always spoke through a mist. So presumably somebody in the electronic things is trying to, in the electronic universe, is trying to achieve the same effect with me. But I assure you, it's got absolutely nothing to do with me, and it does eventually clear up. But hello, and it's great to be with everybody again. And let's have a wonderful show. I'm sure we're going to have one soon.
Yeah,
lots to discuss.
Let's get moving. Thank you to everyone for joining us on this Friday. We got a lot of news to cover, and we'll just jump into a lot of questions from the live stream, from the super chats, from the local stream, and we'll just have a good conversation about all the news. But Alexander, I have three topics that that I kind of highlighted, but we'll talk about a lot of different things. First off, let me say a big thank you and a big hello to our awesome moderators. I see that Alan Watson is in the house. I see that the Great Valley S is in the house. Cosmic Rain is in the house. And who else? Who else has a wrench that I'm looking for here? I think I got everybody that is moderating today. Thank you very much for moderating the stream. And Alexander, let's get to it. Thank you to everybody wherever you are in the world joining us this Friday and talking geopolitics, talking about AUKUS. I keep on spelling it wrong everywhere. No. I have it AUSUK, but I think it's AUKUS. Anyway, all these acronyms they're jumbling my brain up. Alexander, we touched upon this yesterday during a live stream. We went pretty in depth with it. You did a special on locals as well, the Duran.locals.com, where you also dug into it a little further. But I want to ask you again about France in this case, because France is really pissed off. I mean, they're coming up with a lot of statements and they're saying that they're upset and that this was a backstabbing. On the one hand, I can see how, Australia needs to look after its national interests, and they have the right to do as they wish. On the flip side, a deal is a deal. You signed a contract. I mean, the militaries were training together up until like a couple of weeks ago, and you had a deal in place, and you broke that deal. But Alexander, before you comment on France, real quick, remember when we had the Ukraine, the Crimea thing, and the Russians had a deal with the French for some boats, right?
Absolutely.
Some boats, absolutely. And when the whole Crimea thing went down, and all the EU and the US were coming down hard on Russia, France broke that agreement. And that agreement was in place, and they were actually ready to deliver those boats. And the French walked away, and they dropped that deal, and the Russians were pissed. What goes around comes around, Alexander?
Absolutely. That's exactly what happens. And that was what happens there. It was the Mistral deal. It was a very controversial deal in Russia, by the way.
I think with Hollande.
With Hollande. It was with Hollande. In fact, again, it was the French came along to the Russians. The Russians wanted to build amphibious warships for their naval infantry, their Marine Corps. They've got a Marine Corps of their own, much smaller than that of the US, but they wanted, big, flat top type ships. Russia isn't very good at building flat tops, or wasn't at that point. And so the French came along and they said to the Russians, well, you got these great ships, the Mistrals, let's build them for you. You pay us money, we build them, you have them. And that wasn't the Russians. A lot of people in Russia weren't happy because it meant Russia buying military equipment, military gear from another country, which of course annoyed the Russian MI6. But anyway, the deal was done. The ships were partly built. In fact, they were almost entirely built. They were built with Russian money. They were also incorporated materials, which the Russians themselves built to make them suitable for Russian uses. So in some ways, rather more potent warships than the ones that the French initially agreed to provide. And of course, the Crimea crisis came, and the French walked away from the deal. And the Russians were very, very angry. And they got some of their money back from the French, but far from all of it. And eventually, those two warships were sold to Egypt. So, I mean, it was a shambles. So what goes round, as you say, comes round. The French reneged on an arms deal to the Russians, and now the Australians have reneged on an arms deal to the French. Now, I should say, I mean, I've been reading a lot about this French arms deal with the Australians, and it seems it wasn't actually a very happy one, because the Australians need to modernize their submarine force. And so they went to the French. The French offered them a submarine, which is going to be based on French nuclear submarines, but converted to operate with conventional engines, which is apparently a bit complicated. And the whole thing wasn't going very well. And the program was slow. And there were all sorts of problems with it. And the Australians were increasingly saying that they weren't hugely happy with the progress of this project. Having said that, it's true, as you rightly said, a deal is a deal. Contract was signed. Sooner or later, no doubt, there's problems with those boats would have been ironed out. And of course, the other point to say is that those boats would have been built in Australia, apparently, and they would have been available much sooner than these new nuclear submarines that Australia is going to get in 10, 15 years' time would have been available. So what's now going to happen is that the Australians are going to be stuck with their existing submarines, which are not particularly, well, they have problems. They're getting old. They're not going to replace them with these new French submarines. They're not going to develop the shipbuilding skills which come with building, modern submarines, and they'll have to wait 15 years probably to get much more powerful submarines that will, which may eventually appear, but that won't help them now. And there's already some talk that because there's this gap between, this deal that's been done now with the US and Britain and Australia and the actual supply of these nuclear-powered submarines, the Australians may actually need to buy more submarines from someone to cover that gap, conventionally powered submarines. And given that they pissed off the French in the way that they have, and the French apparently making it very clear that they're not interested in helping the Australians with this project, well, we'll just have to wait and see what the Australians come up with. So it's a weird affair, very badly managed by all sides. Neither Australia nor France come out well from it.
All right. France, do you think they're going to do something?
Well, it's a good question. What can they do? I mean, they can't force the Australians to buy their submarines. They can't. I mean, they don't have any leverage over Australia. They have only very limited leverage over the United States. They're very angry with the British, but at the end of the day, it's not the British who are really the drivers behind this affair. So I don't really see what the French in the short term can do. They could, in theory, do many things. They could start acting like a proper, real, independent country and start pursuing their own foreign policy. And they might start saying to themselves and to the Americans, well, look, you've got your problems far away in the Pacific with the Chinese. We're not interested in that. But since you're not interested in us, since you stab us in the back in this way, well, we're going to follow our own policies in Europe. We have long-standing history of good relations with Russia. Macron has received Putin several times. He's tried to maintain this dialogue with Russia. Ukraine has got in the way. American policy has got in the way. Well, maybe the French can tell the Americans, well, if you want to do all this with the Chinese, we're going to do what we want with the Russians. But do the French have those guts? Do they have the courage to do that? I don't believe they do at the moment. I mean, that's what a de Gaulle figure might have done. But at the moment, there is no de Gaulle in French politics.
Oh, there's a Macron.
Okay. There's a Macron. Well, that's the thing about Macron. I mean, he comes up with these very so-called clever big words from time to time. He talks about France doing this and France doing that and France having these opinions. I mean, you remember he once said that NATO was brain dead or something like that, but he never follows through. At the end of the day, it's all talk with him. It's never any action. And I have to say, looking at French politics at the moment, I don't really see any difference. I mean, just possibly if Le Pen wins the election next year, which is looking increasingly unlikely, she might decide to do something like that. But even about that, I'm not confident anymore. And if it's Michel Barnier, who is the new Conservative candidate that's being put up, well, he's a Eurocrat to his fingertips. He will just follow the same policies that Hollande followed and Macron has followed, and before them Sarkozy followed, and it will be more of the same. I mean, the French people, I'm sure, will be increasingly disillusioned, but they also seem very demoralized at the moment, and they're not really able to resist in any concerted way. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we have some questions from Amrit, which are related to this, the submarine stuff, and Amrit says that Sapien is the Italian firm that provided pipeline laying vessel technology, the most critical, that was decisive for the completion of the project. I imagine it's Nord Stream 2 that this is referencing. And Amrit also says that apart from Japan, Italy is the only country to have developed their own lithium-ion submarines. So you talked about Japan yesterday as well.
Absolutely. Japan, and I would say, I mean, Korea also now builds submarines that use lithium ion. And the point about lithium ion is the same type of batteries that are used in, Tesla cars and those sort of things, and in mobile phones. They have much more storage capacity than the old conventional lead acid batteries. So a submarine, a diesel electric submarine, can stay underwater for much longer than it could with the old types of batteries, with these new types of batteries. On the other hand, as anybody who's had experience of lithium ion knows, it's a rather unstable material, and keeping those batteries working and preventing them from sort of, burning and, breaking down, it's actually quite a complex technology. So far, the Australians have shown no interest in it. And I think that in terms of Japan, it's got some very sophisticated submarines using that kind of technology, and very long-range submarines, that they're not as powerful as nuclear boats. And of course, if Japan were to decide to build nuclear-powered boats, that's a whole stage of capability above any conventionally powered boat. I mean, conventionally powered submarines, so I understand, have their uses. They're much quieter than nuclear powered submarines. They're probably better in coastal waters. So you can see why the Chinese, for example, have invested heavily in them, because their major concern is the coastal seas around China and the island chains around there. But if you want to operate in the great oceans, then of course you need nuclear powered boats, and even lithium ion boats aren't really a substitute.
Yeah, every now and then Teslas catch on fire, so maybe not the best idea. Yeah,
it's maybe not the best idea. As you say.
Amrit also says that seeing the development in Australia, Italy will be quite tempted to develop its own nuclear submarines, as it has all the industrial and technical capabilities to do so without external help.
Well, it might do. I'm not entirely sure why Italy would want to, because bear in mind, Italy's navy is basically focused on the Mediterranean. And the Mediterranean famously is an area where conventional submarines are probably more effective than nuclear powered ones, because it's got shallow waters, it's quite small. As I said, these types of submarines are much quieter. Conventionally powered submarines are much quieter. So it seems to me that, a small enclosed sea like the Mediterranean, relatively small and enclosed, certainly by comparison with the Atlantic or the Pacific, conventionally powered submarines would probably be more useful. By the way, the Russians, who have a very, very extensive nuclear-powered submarine fleet, never operate nuclear-powered submarines in the Mediterranean. They only use conventionally powered boats there, precisely because they see that the Mediterranean is more suitable for conventionally powered boats. The Americans sent nuclear-powered submarines into the Mediterranean because the US Navy only operates nuclear-powered submarines, but all the other countries, including the Russians, tend to use conventionally powered submarines in the Mediterranean. So I don't see why Italy would do it. Certainly they have the capability to do it, but I don't see why they would want to.
Yeah, Simon says that the UK can build 2 to 3 additional Astute subs, lease them to Australia, which gets experience with nuke boats. The Royal Navy gets additional SSNs.
Well, that's a possibility, and there are precedents. Can I just say one thing, which is that, of course, the Russians have actually leased nuclear-powered boats, just like that, to India. And, of course, that gave the Indians a great deal of knowledge about how to operate nuclear-powered submarines. And now, of course, the Indians are building their own nuclear-powered submarines using a lot of the know-how and skills they acquired from operating Russian boats. So, I mean, that's a possibility. The question is, will that happen? And I have a suspicion that it won't, actually. I doubt that the British will build more Astute-class submarines for the Australians. It's possible. It may be what will come. We shall just have to wait and see.
Yeah, Leafy Bug says it was a commercial arrangement. Breaking the contract will cost the Australians billions as per the contract. If the French are upset with this arrangement, make a better contract next time. No one has acted illegally.
Oh, no one has acted illegally in the sense that nobody's committed any crime, but obviously contracts have been broken, and France, I suppose, would be entitled to sue and seek compensation, though it's always difficult to bring a legal action against a sovereign state. But I've no doubt the Australians will pay the French compensation. So just as the French paid some compensation to the Russians, I mean, that's how it's going to end. That's how it's going to resolve. So, I mean, the French are very angry. They feel very betrayed, because also the other thing to bear in mind is that, they've sold submarines to the Australians, and that they were no doubt hoping that Australia would become a market for other French arms. I mean, that's the business.
They were getting a customer. Yeah.
They were getting a customer, and now they've lost that customer. So from their point of view, that's a big blow.
Yeah, absolutely. From Mark Hewitt says, do you think the planning of the AUKUS, whatever it's called, was going on during the Trump administration and was also meant to include other members of the Quad? That's a good question.
That is a very good question. And by the way, about the first part of it, I have absolutely no doubt that it started months ago, probably under the Trump administration. I think that is highly likely, to put it mildly. This sort of thing isn't agreed out of nowhere. So I think that is a real possibility. If it did involve other members of the Quad, and we're talking about India here, then clearly India is not playing along, because the Indians are not part of this deal. And at the moment, the Indians are in fact apparently talking with the Russians about importing more surface-to-air missiles. So India is a member of the Quad, but they're trying to make sure that the Quad doesn't evolve into an outright alliance. It's not comparable to AUKUS. By the way, I think the actual pronunciation there is AUKUS. Australia, AUKUS. UK, US, AUKUS.
No, I'm messing up. I'm messing up.
But I think it is AUKUS. But anyway, these are confusing things, and confusingly, there are other organizations that seem rather similar in their spelling. But anyway, let's get past that. I think the Indians will not want to align as closely to the US as Australia has. I think India will want to maintain its freedom of movement. So I think they will tilt to the Americans. They'll buy arms from the Americans, but I don't think they'll go to the point of actually seeking to acquire that kind of nuclear technology from the US, because I don't think they feel they need it, but secondly, I think they don't want to commit too much to a situation where they would lose friends and allies in Central Asia that they might be aspiring to win over.
Yeah, Sidebook VR says South Korea was arguing about a nuke sub before, but now moved on to arguing about getting light carrier to mostly fight Japan, and to a lesser degree, North Korea.
Well, I'm going to say this. I went to South Korea back in the early 2000s, and things may have changed since then. I was very impressed by the country, by the way. But I was also very surprised that by far the country that South Koreans, or seemed to be antagonistic towards was Japan. I mean, there's a lot of history between those two countries, and there is no friendship between them, as I quickly discovered, despite the fact that in some ways relations are actually quite close commercially and economically. I don't believe that the South Koreans want a carrier, a flat top, in order to fight Japan. I'm sure it's about North Korea. And of course, North Korea is involved in a major build-up. They've just tested cruise missiles. And they were talking last year about the fact that they've finalized their own plans to build a nuclear-powered submarine. Now, what kind of submarine that will be, God only knows, and whether we'll see it anytime soon, and how noisy and dangerous it will be, we shall see. But the fact is that's the direction the North Koreans say they're going. And I think the South Koreans are reacting to it.
Yeah, Rich says that Nord Stream was to a great extent built with Italian machinery and equipment, only to benefit Germany. Great. That's how it usually works.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, the Italians would presumably have been paid for all of that. So I suppose some Italian companies did quite well out of it.
Yeah, Leafy Bug says SSNs are a better fit for Australian requirements. And
Possibly.
yes. Yeah, possibly.
Possibly. I mean, I'm not. I mean, you know, Australia is, you know, it's geographically a long way from, you know, China and its territories. So I mean, you know, one could perhaps understand why it would want to have nuclear-powered submarines that can go much longer distances than shorter range submarines conventionally powered, which might be more efficient in coastal waters. But you know, it would need ocean-going submarines rather than coastal ones.
Yeah, and Simon says, after 107 years of strategic folly, the UK is moving from a continental to a maritime strategy. Great for the UK, bad for the EU and the Baltic states.
Oh, well, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, I'm not sure quite what the British are doing in some of the things they're doing around the world, but I think that ultimately Britain does need to start rediscovering its old maritime and trading skills. But, you know, it's also got to think objectively. I mean, one of the most, I thought, astonishing things was the way in which the British reacted to the debacle in Afghanistan. And they seem to be saying that the United States should have stuck it out indefinitely and that the British should have somehow been alongside them. And that didn't make any kind of sense to me. So the British need to think their strategy through. I would agree. I would say spend more money on the Royal Navy, develop a maritime presence, rediscover your trading skills, rediscover your financial skills, all those kind of things that Britain was so successful with before. And by the way, try and avoid becoming overcommitted to conflicts around the world, which is not what Britain used to do. I mean, Britain was like the United States once upon a time, wary of getting drawn into alliances.
Yeah. The Netherlands actually, Kaag, that was she was the leader of the I forgot the name of the party, but she actually resigned over Afghanistan. So, you know, there were some politicians that had to resign because of what happened. Not in the U.S.
Not in the U.S. Oh no, in the U.S. no one ever resigns. Not even the head of the chief of staff who talks to the Chinese counterpart and tells him that, you know, if you hear about a war, it's not meant seriously. I mean, not even he resigns.
Let's see here. We'll get to we'll talk about Canada in a bit. Let's do one more question here from Gender Neutral says, what do you make of SOROS calling China a dangerous enemy and China's Global Times labeling SOROS a global economic terrorist? Yeah, they went back and forth a little bit, but boy, did China really stick it to SOROS in the end.
Absolutely. Now, I did a long program about that, which you can, if you go to Locals, if you join us on Locals, it's an exclusive Locals video. You'll find, and I did an hour's video on this topic. Here's it straightforwardly. I read Soros' article. I thought it was wrong in many particulars. Might have been right in some others, but I also got overwhelmingly the impression that Soros has lost money, and that this is what's making him so angry. I mean, he was talking about, you know, the damage done to Western investors by, you know, the actions the Chinese are taking in their property market. And I have to say, I did wonder whether in some form he's invested in the Chinese property market and is, miffed off because he's lost money there, because that's how it read to me, to be straightforward. And of course, he added in all kinds of things about, open societies and freedom and the threat of China and all that kind of thing. And it was also saying that the United States should come to the rescue of these investors by passing all kinds of acts directed to China, which, would force the Chinese to protect investors like him in that kind of situation. But we mustn't get fooled by Soros. He often talks in ways that seem on the surface to be very ideological and full of high-flown libertarian language. But when you drill down, he talks like an oligarch, which is what he is, pursuing his own self-interests, which is what he does. And that was very much my impression.
At the end of the day, with Soros, it's all about money.
Yeah.
Has nothing to do with open society, foundations, and human rights, or none of that stuff. That's the disguise. That's the veneer. But at the end of the day, for him, it's just all about making cash.
Yes.
From Simon, Chinese bullying and U.S. weakness is making a nuclear-armed South Korea, Japan, and Australia inevitable. Discuss.
Well, I hope not. I mean, I should say if they go down that road, if Japan and South Korea were to acquire nuclear weapons, that is the end of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And then, of course, it's a free-for-all. The entire world starts acquiring nuclear weapons, and then we're in a completely different situation, and goodness knows where that goes. And by the way, I would say that the country that would be most threatened by that outcome would not be China. Ultimately, it would be the United States, because it's not China that's intervening in many places at the moment. It's the United States is. And if everybody has nuclear weapons, well, regime change becomes, if not impossible, far more difficult, and regime change wars become impossible too. But, we don't want to see nuclear weapons proliferated that way. At least I don't. I think it'd be very dangerous and very destabilizing. But Chinese bullying, let's talk about that, because I think there has been an element. I think there's a very strong element of truth to this. We discussed it in the live that we did yesterday. The Chinese have been extremely belligerent in their responses to things that the Australians have been doing. I'm not saying that they haven't had cause up to now to be annoyed with the Australians, but the way they have been talking to the Australians has been so forceful, and they've been taking so many harsh actions against Australia that I frankly am not surprised that the Australians felt pushed to align more closely with the US. I wonder whether a more careful and measured response towards Australia, which, after all, China is Australia's biggest trade partner, would have been, I'm sure it would have been much more effective. So I think the Chinese are being overconfident. I've said this many times.
People get upset when you say that. Yeah,
I know that. I think I know some people get upset, but I think they've been overconfident. I think they've been overstating things. I think they need to calm down a little, and dare I say, learn from the Russians here, who are much more experienced in diplomacy than the Chinese are, at least this kind of level of diplomacy. And I think the Russians know exactly how to pitch it. You remember when they were talking all the time about the West being their partners, even as the West our partners and all that sort of thing. And I think in the end, that actually works better. And especially for a country like China, it would have worked better. But the other side of the equation, the United States and US weakness, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, we have a policy in the US where the US, at the one hand, wants to cooperate with China on some things, be confrontational with China on others. It can't organize a proper withdrawal from Afghanistan. Its government looks incredibly disorganized at the moment. The president is a zero. The vice president goes to Vietnam and manages to both alarm and offend her hosts, and causes Vietnam to align more closely with China than it might otherwise have done. I mean, the Chinese look at all of this and they must be saying to themselves, the US is in such a mess that, of course, we can press forward. And when the chief of the chairman of the Combined Chiefs of Staff telephones them and tells them, in effect, don't pay any attention to what the president of the United States says, then, what are the Chinese going to think? I mean, it goes without saying.
Yeah, he did a lot of damage.
Absolutely.
That guy. Yeah. Rich says someone saying Chinese bullying. Well, it is American intervention in East Asia that has resulted in today's bad situation.
No. And again, I accept that. Look, I don't think the United States, first of all, should be interfering in the South China Sea. I mean, said this many times. I don't know what the United States is doing in the South China Sea. Vietnam says it's got issues with China about the South China Sea. It's able to manage them. I think Philippines too. I think all of these countries would sort it out in time. Maybe the Chinese would, cut hard bargains with all of them, but I don't see a danger of a war there. And the South China Sea is a large part anyway of the world's oceans. So yes, I agree. But again, learn from the Russians here. The Russians, as I said, know when to talk tough and they know when to talk soft. And it works to their advantage. Now, in Europe, it's difficult. In the Middle East, they're winning hands down. And they're doing that always by measuring their response to American actions. They may see American actions as provocative, but they know how to calibrate them.
Here's a counter argument from the chat from ETHEREUM. Says China learned from China learning from Russians. Russia now has NATO on her borders because they were too soft on the West. This is what China wants to avoid. There is that argument that Putin is too soft.
Well, I know it is, but that goes back. I mean, the fact about NATO being on their borders goes back to the events of the 1990s. And the reason that relations between Russia and the West have become so dangerous now, so sticky now, is because since Putin came in, that has basically ended. Bear in mind, Russia was in a much weaker position when Putin became president than it is today. So I have to say again, I don't agree with this. I think that if you are the leader of a great power and a great power, you choose your words carefully and you are more measured in what you say. Otherwise, the risk you run is, firstly, you will alarm people and they will work against you. And secondly, you will scare some people away. And that, I think, is what has happened in one or two places in Asia.
Yeah. Moondragon says, if the US and China go to war, do you think that Russia will allow the Chinese to be defeated if you consider what would happen to Russia if China lost?
I think the Russians do not want to see a war between China and the US, because from the Russian point of view, they do not want to be dragged into a confrontation between China and the US, which they might not be directly involved in. But at the same time, if they find themselves in that kind of situation, they certainly would not want to see China fall and the US win. So they would have to make some very, very tough calculations in Europe and in the North Atlantic and in the Arctic, and well, we could see all sorts of things happening in that kind of event. So, I'm not able to predict exactly what Russian thinking is, but I'm going to say something. Whatever it is, I think the Russians and the Chinese are talking to each other all the time. They're cooperating each other militarily. Their militaries are speaking to each other constantly. They are sharing technology. And this deal with Australia is going to make them share more technology still. We're going to very likely see the Russians, for example, provide China before very long with anti-ballistic missile technology, and quite possibly with ballistic missile technology and perhaps hypersonic technology too. So we're going to see all these sort of things happening. And it seems to me that in the immediate term, we are in an arms race. And I think that in the event of a conflict, you can be sure that Beijing and Moscow will be talking to each other, and that the Russians will take some steps in Europe, though I don't know how strong those will be. But the Russians, I am sure, are also telling the Chinese at the moment exactly what I'm saying. Slow down. Don't be so strong. At the moment, it's not working out. You see what's happened with Australia. Let people like Kamala come to Vietnam and continue to make their mistakes there and capitalize on them. That's the better game for you to play than to start getting into quarrels with Japan, potentially quarrels with South Korea. Actually, there aren't really many issues between China and South Korea at the moment, but quarrels, say, with Japan, which could turn out badly for you.
Yeah, Putin's judo policy when it comes to foreign policy. Alexander, I was going to say let's segue to Canada, but actually this is a good segue to talk about Russia, and we'll get some more questions as well in a few minutes. But there is parliamentary elections. There are parliamentary elections going on in Russia. It is a 3-day event. I've gotten a lot of people who have sent me a lot of messages, and a lot of people that I know that are saying the elections are running smooth. A lot of monitors there. You have to show your ID. You have to show your passport, paper ballots, and it's business as usual. But of course, the West is running a lot of articles saying, once again, there's corruption, there's voting irregularities. Navalny had an application that he put out on Apple and Google, which got pulled from those stores. I don't know what Navalny's doing, putting out apps to influence election results, but Navalny is sneaky like that. Anyway, what is the picture of what's going on in Russia? The party that backs Putin, because Putin's not a member of the United Russia Party, but he is kind of the de facto patron of that party. What are their outlooks as we go into these parliamentary elections?
Well, most people believe that United Russia is going to lose support, and the Communist Party, which is the biggest opposition party, is going to gain support. Now, I suspect the reason that's going to happen is the same reason that we see things like that happening all around the world. Russia is affected by high rising prices, and that's, of course, affecting people's living standards. And of course, there's also been the problems of the pandemic, which is the same in Russia as they are everywhere else. Though Russia is not pursuing a lockdown policy or anything like that at the moment, and hasn't done so since the early spring and summer of last year. So I think that we will see a fall in United Russia's ratings. I still expect them to retain their majority. We could see a rise in the Communist Party support. When Russians are concerned about domestic issues, they tend to gravitate towards the Communist Party. When it's about foreign policy, those who don't want to support United Russia tend to back Vladimir Zhirinovsky's Liberal Democratic Party, which is more hardline and more nationalist. So at the moment, it's domestic issues that are paramount. So that works to the communists. In either case, I think United Russia is falling. Now, about a few things. Let's talk about Navalny. Navalny, in his app, he's trying to say, which he always says, that people should vote for any party that is likely to win against United Russia, Putin's party. Let's call it Putin's party, which in this election, in effect, means vote for the Communist Party. Now, that is what the great liberal, the pro-Westerner, the supporter of free markets is telling Russians. Now, of course, they're not going to pay any attention to him. But the true reason he's doing that, and his team is doing that, is because they read the polls, as everybody else does, and they see that the Communist Party is likely to win support. So, of course, what Navalny is going to try and do, and that's what that app was all about, he's going to say, well, the reason people are voting communist is not because people wanted to vote communist, because they're unhappy about rising prices and the pandemic and those sorts of things. They're voting communist because I have told them to. So that will give that will enable him to pretend once again that he is a far more important figure in Russia than he actually is. And as night follows day, you're going to see articles, if there is a rise in communist support, as people say, you're going to see articles appearing in all sorts of Western newspapers attributing that rise in Communist Party support to what Navalny is up to. So that is what Navalny's game is. He's done this time and again. He is, if you like, parasitically attaches himself to whichever party, opposition party in Russia is rising, so that he can then pretend that he is the true great opposition leader. And of course, his supporters in the Western media and Western governments and NGOs go away and either pretend to themselves that that is true or collude in this fantasy. That's Navalny. I mean, I don't want to waste more time with him. As for the West saying that these elections are rigged and not recognizing the Russian parliament and talking about all of those sort of things, they always do that. They've done that in every single election since Putin became president of Russia. And of course, they're going to say that. They're never going to recognize any election in Russia so long as Putin or someone like Putin is leading Russia. In other words, for so long as Russia is led by a leader who pursues Russian national interests. It doesn't matter what actually happens in the election itself, how well it's run or how not, whether it's run smoothly or whether it's run badly. That is what the West is always going to say. And we've now had a report from the European Parliament which says, we shouldn't recognize the outcome of the elections and we should delegitimize the Russian Parliament. They've never recognized the legitimacy of the Russian Parliament or of Russian elections. It's all the same story that we always hear.
This time, though, the EU and especially the United States, they don't have two legs to stand on when it comes to elections this time around. And I'm sure we're going to see people like maybe Lavrov or who else? Zakharova. Maybe they're going to come out and they're going to call out the hypocrisy because they enjoy doing it now. When it comes to elections now, they're going to call out the hypocrisy.
Mm. Well, I agree. That's exactly what they're going to do. That's precisely what they're going to do. And by the way, this is, I said, the Russians can be pretty abrasive when they have to, and they will be very abrasive about this. Josep Borrell, the High Representative, the pompous, insufferable, and ridiculous European Union High Representative,
unelected,
unelected, exactly, went to Moscow in January, and Lavrov just shredded him, and he got shredded in a news conference as well. So the Russians can be pretty abrasive when they have to be, and you can be sure they will be on this occasion too.
Yeah, I will say one thing: the Russians did have to present their identification as they voted, so. That tells you something.
Well, it does.
And paper ballots, from what I understand.
Well, indeed. Well, that's the other thing, of course. And by the way, since we're on that topic, just very, very briefly, one option which could have been used last year in a certain country, the United States, might have been to extend the election over 3 days. And that's exactly what the Russians have done. Now, why that couldn't have happened in the United States? Well, you must ask other people. I think we all know the answer. But it could, if that was the concern, it could have been done exactly that way. But of course, it wasn't.
Yeah. Well, let's get to the Canadian elections, Alexander, and preview those. But let's answer a couple more questions, and then we'll get to the elections in Canada. Sidebook says that for Koreans, U.S. is eternal empire with mandate of heaven. Both right, left cannot directly criticize the U.S. hard. So we use Japan as a proxy. Majority think Obama is a saint and Biden is respected and functioning elder. Biden is a functioning elder.
Well, God help us then. I have to say, when I did go to Korea, the extent of US influence in Korea was very obvious. But I have to say, my impression, which is of course a very brief impression, was that Koreans were perfectly well aware of the international situation and were able to make their own assessments. For what it was worth, and that was, of course, during the time of George W. Bush, I came across quite a few Koreans who were quite critical of US policy at that time. So anyway, that was my impression.
Jeff Rich says that China's harsh rhetoric is driving divisions among elites in Australia. People like Rudd and Keating have come out to say we need to keep on China's side.
Well, there you go. I understand that, but as I said, I mean, divisions which are working against China. I mean, it seems to me what the Chinese could have done with Australia would have been to remind the Australians repeatedly, look, we've been perfectly good relations between you until fairly recently. You're far away from China. There's no threat to you from us. Let's keep all this to one side. Do you really want to get drawn into a conflict with Taiwan? Do you really want to get involved in all that sort of thing? And obviously, we understand that you're an ally of the United States. Australia has always been an ally of the United States ever since the Second World War. You're part of the Five Eyes. We don't dispute that. We don't challenge that. We're prepared, however, to work with you, provided you work with us. And at the end of the day, we both need to work hard to keep this relationship stable. Now, that might have worked. It might not have worked. But the way things have turned out is that Australia has now, it seems to me, taken a decisive turn towards the United States. And despite what people like Keating and Rudd say, I don't think that's going to change.
Yeah. Thank you, Satoshi Nakamoto, for that super sticker, by the way. Thank you very much. And Simon says the UK and France sought nuclear weapons because they never trusted the US. Pacific democracies would be foolish if they didn't seek nuclear weapons.
Well, I'm going to say something about Britain and France. I think the primary reason why Britain and France developed nuclear weapons is because they wanted to establish themselves in the 50s and 60s as great powers. Certainly, I'm sure that was part of de Gaulle's reasoning, and I've no doubt that was part of Britain's reasoning too. They were both permanent members of the Security Council. They saw the fact that the Russians and the Americans had nuclear weapons. They said to themselves, if we are going to be permanent members and we're going to be secure in our position as permanent members, we need to have nuclear weapons also. And I think as the world has become more fluid, that has become more important to them. So I think that was what drove that decision. Now, in terms of Japan, Korea, all those countries, if they go ahead and acquire nuclear weapons, as I said, first of all, it might make sense for them in terms of their own defense, but in terms of the state of proliferation around the world, nuclear proliferation, it would be a total disaster. And having spoken to many people from Asia, by the way, and lots of people from Asia, I think that Japan would especially Japan, would find that it had many problems with other Asian countries if it went down the road of going nuclear. I think a lot of Asian countries, South Korea being one, by the way, would be very alarmed indeed if the Japanese took that step.
Yeah. Thank you, Brian, for that €10 super chat. And Raul Pinto says that Sputnik, the publication says, Japan ground self-defense force, large-scale exercise for the first time in 28 years. Any thoughts?
Well, there we go.
You're getting a lot of news like that out of Japan.
Well, we are. We're getting a lot of, absolutely. I mean, Japan is in a nervous state. And again, Japan and China, they've also seen a steady deterioration in their relations. And again, the rhetoric that each side is, hurling at the other is incredibly strong. And again, I do wonder where the Chinese rhetoric here isn't making a situation worse for China instead of better, because obviously from China's point of view, Japan acquiring nuclear weapons would be a horrifying thing. So not just for China, by the way, but for, as I said, other countries also. I'm not convinced it'd be good for Japan, by the way. But regardless, it's again a case of the Chinese letting their rhetoric get out of control.
Yeah, Violin Merchant says DPRK firing missiles again seems to happen when they run out of money. Possible that arms dump in Afghanistan has damaged their black market.
Who knows? There's so much about North Korea that we don't understand. I'm going to say this. My understanding is that the economy in North Korea, which had actually had a significant uptick in the first years that Kim Jong-un was around, apparently is now in a very bad shape. I mean, they closed the border with China. They imposed, in effect, radical sanctions on themselves to try and block the pandemic from entering North Korea. And of course, that's put them under very severe economic stress. But they've shown before that they can withstand economic stress like that. And it doesn't seem to stop them pressing forward with their military technology developments. And I have to say, I get the sense that military technology and military upgrading in North Korea is an overriding priority for the North Korean government, and that they're prepared to accept any number of sacrifices in order to keep that going, because I think they feel that it gives them, weight, political strength far above what their economic weight would otherwise give them. And in effect, what they're doing steadily is making themselves what I call a pocket superpower, a relatively small country, but it's got intercontinental ballistic missiles, nuclear weapons, and before very long, it's going to say it's got now long-range cruise missiles, and before very long, it might even acquire nuclear submarines, or so it says.
Yeah. Jay Perez says, don't criticize the great leader. Yes, let's not criticize the great leader or dear leader. So let's segue from the great leader, dear leader of North Korea, Alexander, and talk about the dear leader of Canada, Justin Trudeau.
Absolutely.
Snap.
Absolutely. And I think that's a very good way to describe him.
It's a good segue. Let's see. So we have a couple of days till the elections, the snap elections in Canada on Monday, September 20th. The polls, once again, I'm going just off of the polls and what I'm reading from all the media outlets. It's neck and neck between conservatives and liberals, O'Toole and Trudeau. So what would it mean if Trudeau wins? What would it mean if Trudeau loses? What would it mean actually if Trudeau gets weakened? He stays in power, but once again, coalition and that type of stuff. How are you seeing this?
I think that the third is actually the most likely outcome. I think that he will just scrape through, but in a weakened position, even more in a minority government, and I think that would be actually a blow for him. I think that in that case, the spell, if you like, that he's cast over Canadian politics would be broken. He would no longer be seen as the sort of dominant figure in Canada, as he's been now for quite a couple of years. And I think that would be the beginning of the end of him, actually. I think that once that spell is broken, then I think a lot of people will start to say to themselves, well, what is Trudeau really all about? What has he really achieved for our country? And I think you start to see mounting criticism, and I think you'd start to see him slide. I still can't quite believe that he's heading for an outright defeat. Some of the early polls showed that. I don't think he's going to go for an outright defeat. But if he does, that is the end of him. I don't think there's any possible coming back. If he wins, and he wins a majority, well, I'm afraid then he'll have consolidated his position. And that would be, in my opinion, very bad news for Canada. But I think the most likely outcome is that he will scrape through as the leader of a minority government, even in a weakened position than he's been up to now. And that will probably mean that more instability in Canada, but authority and prestige that Trudeau has had will drain away.
Yeah, I wonder if he wins, if he just scrapes by, if you start to look at a transition start to take effect as the years pass, to start to fade Trudeau out and kind of reshuffle things.
Exactly. Well, I think that's probably what will happen. And I think that's the most likely outcome. I think, as I said, if he only scrapes through a win, it will be the beginning of the end of Trudeau. Because, so much of his success up to now has been predicated on the fact that he appears to the world, at least, to be the dominant figure in Canada. And if he is no longer seen in those terms, very difficult to see how you could put him together again.
What does it mean for Canada? Actually, what does it mean for the world if a party like the People's Party, like an anti-jab, anti-lockdown, libertarian type of party, let's just frame it like a libertarian type of party, breaks through, much in the same way that, say, back in the day, a UKIP broke through in the UK? What happens if they break through and they get a substantial amount of support?
Well, I
even with
think
Trudeau scraping by.
yeah, what will happen, and you know, this is I'm taking unfortunately a pessimistic view about that. What will happen is that the political class will become extremely alarmed and very angry, and they will tighten up all the mechanisms of control that we see in order to grind it down. That's what they tried to do in Britain with Brexit. It didn't quite work there. And of course, that's also what they did in the United States. I think you would see a very, very strong reaction. Now, I mean, in a way, it would be a great thing because it would show that many people in Canada don't think the way that, you know, the establishment, the political class want them to think. It would again expose the fragility of that class and its hold over Western societies, particularly in a place like Canada, where, as I said, the Trudeau thing has been built up to the extent that it has. But as I said, I have to say it straightforwardly, I think the immediate response would be more repression. And I don't imagine, I can't see any scenario where it is given a pole position in a government. I mean, even if the Conservatives, you know, try and form some kind of coalition with it, which I don't really expect, I don't really believe that it would really be in any kind of control or in any position to influence things. That's been the pattern. Whenever, as I said, parties have come up and have challenged the establishment, be it in Europe, in Britain, in the United States, the establishment's, the political class's reaction has been ferocious. And I'm sure that will be true, even more true in Canada.
Yeah, people forget that Farage withstood a lot of attacks over
Absolutely.
many years, many decades.
Yes.
But he stood firm.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, but he was, and I repeat this again, he was an exceptionally gifted political leader. I mean, nowhere in no other country, except to some extent with Trump in the United States, have you seen the equivalent. No other leader has had that combination of, you know, undoubted, you know, rhetorical skills that Farage has, but also the tactical and political skill, the nous, the understanding that politics has to be built up from the bottom up, the granular feel of constituencies in the north of England and those sort of things, that no one else has reproduced that. And as you rightly said, it took decades for Farage to get to that point. So in the meantime, if you come up too fast, they go for you, and they go for you ruthlessly. You get smeared in the media, you get investigated by the various intelligence agencies and communities. You'll see the social media clampdowns. You'll see the allegations that you're working for the Russians. that's a given nowadays. You see all those sort of things. You'll get called all sorts of names, all kinds of labels will be attached to you. The R word and the F word will be bandied around for all it's worth. And, you've got to be ready to withstand that. And you've got to be prepared to withstand that. And I don't think the People's Party yet is up to facing that kind of barrage. Not at the moment.
They're getting there. I mean,
they're getting there.
I think they're getting there. And they're gaining strength.
And if they gain strength and they break through, then, as I said, I mean, it's an important event in itself, which should not be underestimated. But as I said, the establishment, the political class, will react in the way that I've said. I mean, they can look at two examples. They can look at how Farage succeeded in Britain, and they can learn from that, or they can look at the AfD and the massive problems it's been having in Germany, and they can look at that. So those are the parallels they need to really draw from.
Yeah, the AfD was so close.
Yeah.
So close, but they just fell apart.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Real quick, what would happen if Trudeau does lose and the Conservatives come in? I mean, psychologically, it's a big win, and it's a big blow to the globalists because it's Trudeau, but policy-wise, not much changes.
More of the same. But as I said, that we shouldn't we shouldn't, have high expectations. I mean, it will be more of the same, but that doesn't mean that, Trudeau losing isn't going to be a big event in itself, because again, I mean, it would be a repudiation by the Canadian people of all the things that Trudeau has come to stand for. And it will be a shock to Western liberals, especially, dare I say, European liberals, maybe also American liberals, because I mean,
the Obama crowd.
The Obama crowd.
Yeah, the Obama
I mean, it would be a shock to them. I mean, they would be deeply disconcerted by it. I mean, it would be something that, they would be very alarmed and very troubled by. And that in itself is not a small thing. It would chip away at their self-confidence and their certainty, and it would, and by the way, make them more aggressive and more dangerous also.
Yeah.
Not more dangerous. They're pretty dangerous anyway, but it would make them more insecure and more aggressive.
More insecure, that's the word. Exactly. More insecure, and they'll try to clamp down harder. From, let's see, Dan Lockman, thank you very much for that super chat. And another super chat from Dan Lockman, which is along the same lines here, Alexander, as to what we're talking about. But this has to do with the UK. You said that Rishi Sunak would be taken out in the UK cabinet reshuffle. No, it didn't happen. Why?
No, I didn't say that. What I actually said, and I remember exactly what I said that Boris was thinking about doing it, and there was a talk. The talk was that it was going to happen. He didn't do it, and the truth is that he's just not strong enough at the moment to do it. And he carried out a reshuffle, a very extensive reshuffle. And what he's trying to do is, of course, it's very typical Boris. On the one hand, he tilted towards the left, towards the Remainer wing of the party, the patrician wing, by jacking up taxes, increasing spending on the National Health Service, or so he says, all that kind of thing. Raising taxes to, by the way, levels we haven't had in Britain since 1950. But now he's balanced that out by bringing in more people who are more closely identified with the Thatcherite free market side of the party, people like Liz Truss, who's now Foreign Secretary. So he's trying to carry out a balancing exercise. At the same time, he has knocked out one person, or demoted one person who has in the past been a rival, and that is Michael Gove. So he's pushed down one potential rival.
Picked off one person.
Yeah. He's isolating Sunak. He's not yet ready to go for him. And of course, he might never be, because Boris's position is not actually that strong. At least that's what I think.
Yeah. I imagine if Trudeau does get into government, you're going to see a lot of reshuffling taking place and a lot of rebranding. That's my prediction. If Trudeau does get in again, they're going to start pulling that stuff.
The problem with Trudeau is that brand Trudeau is now so established that to try to change the brand while he's still there is, I would have thought, all but impossible. So if his party concludes that it can't be done, that rebranding him is impossible, which it is, and that's a losing brand, then of course the political imperative becomes to replace him with someone else. So that's what I think. So he can reshuffle all he likes, but it would be like reshuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic after it's hit the iceberg. That's how it would look to me.
Yeah. From IC Thulu, I believe that Russia will pull a Switzerland in the coming conflicts to benefit from the West's deterioration.
A Switzerland? You mean take a neutral position?
Yeah, take a neutral position.
I don't think it can. I think that for Switzerland to be able to do that, it's a relatively small country. And of course, Switzerland was only able to do that because all the other countries agreed. I don't think that Russia is in that kind of position, whether it likes it or not. And there are times, by the way, when the Russians themselves almost say, we wish we weren't. But whether it likes it or not, it's a great power. It has powerful armed forces. It's got enormous assets. It has problems with the West. I think it finds itself in a position where it will have to take sides. What I think it will want to do is to prevent the situation spinning out of control in a way that is put in the position that it has to take sides in that way. So I think that, they will be a restraining force in Beijing at the moment. I think that they will be trying to sort of cancel moderation to the Chinese.
Yeah. From Simon, Alexander, you're wrong. North Korea wasn't invaded because it had nukes. The NPR died when Pakistan got nukes. They have no choice.
Well, I don't agree. Straightforwardly, I mean, I think that India and Pakistan acquiring nuclear weapons was a big blow to the NPR. But if Japan does it, and Japan is a much more pivotal ally to the West than Pakistan or India were. Well, in that case, I think we're in a completely different situation. I mean, India was a member of the Non-Aligned Movement. It was never an ally of the US. Pakistan was a kind of ally of the US, but in a kind of different relationship. Japan is an absolutely seminal one. Japan does it. Nuclear non-proliferation treaty is dead, and more countries around the world will go down the road of getting nuclear weapons. And it's important to stress, when we're talking about nuclear weapons, it's important always to understand that this is now an old technology. Nuclear weapons were acquired in the 1940s using technologies today which we have far surpassed. I mean, a laptop, an ordinary laptop today provides far more computing power than anything that the people who were involved in the Manhattan Project could have dreamed of. So there's some difficulty getting the raw materials, but even that is not as difficult as some people say. I think we will start to see countries like Brazil, Argentina, other Latin American countries, Iran, of course, Saudi Arabia, Algeria, one of those places, they will all follow. And, that will be very, very much more complicated for the world. And the country that will have the most difficulties, as I say, facing it, will be the United States. Not suggesting the Chinese and the Russians will be pleased. They won't be pleased. But we will see that happen on a scale like we've just never seen before.
Yeah, Heyman says that trying to fight China and Asia is like the Russians trying to fight the Americans in Cuba. First rule of geopolitics is geography. Alice in Wonderland.
I completely agree. That's absolutely right. That's totally true. And of course, talking about that, the Russians were perfectly well aware that they couldn't fight a conventional battle against the US and Cuba. That's why they sent nuclear weapons there. The US reacted very, very strongly to that. And in fact, we nearly got into a situation, the closest we've ever got to a nuclear exchange between the great powers, and one which, almost happened. And of course, the Russians eventually withdrew their nuclear weapons from Cuba. And I think that the Americans also need to understand that, especially with Taiwan, there are very great risks in escalation, and they would face the same problems defending Taiwan that the Russians faced with Cuba. In the end, a deal was done, and it worked with Cuba. And some kind of similar deal needs to be done with respect to Taiwan, but one which I'm afraid acknowledges China's ultimate sovereignty over Taiwan. And that may be very difficult for many people in the US to accept.
Yeah. Boris says that France is humiliated again. It's the start of the EU army. We've talked about the EU army.
Well,
yeah.
I think more to the point, this incident, this business with the Australian nuclear submarine deal has humiliated France. I mean, they must be absolutely furious that it's the British who are involved in this deal and not France. I mean, they're perfectly entitled to say, well, we build nuclear submarines also. We had a submarine deal with Australia. Why not honor that submarine deal by upgrading those submarines we were going to provide to Australia into nuclear submarines? After all, as I said, they were an adaptation of a French nuclear submarine design. So the French will be feeling doubly humiliated because they will have been pushed aside. not just by the Americans. That is very difficult for them, but perhaps they can just about accept it. But by the British also, by the old enemy, if you like. And of course,
by the
French,
Brexit, by the
by the
Brexit British as well.
by the Brexit British as well, indeed. And, you know, when the French rake up the spectre of Trafalgar when they were defeated by the British Navy, well, you know, you can understand how they feel. So, I mean, I think that's probably right. I think they will be very angrily now looking for options. And certainly Macron, he will be pressing ahead with his European army idea. But of course, I don't think that's going to come to pass. I think the Germans are not keen. And then, of course, what do the French do? Do they accept it, or do they decide that, you know, we have to pursue a more sovereignist foreign policy than the one we have up to now? Well, we'll see. For the moment, I think they're going to accept it, because that's what France does at the moment. As I said, there's no de Gaulle or anyone like that there at the moment. But perhaps, who knows, maybe one day they will draw the appropriate conclusions and start acting like the real country that they used to be.
Yeah. Alan says that it's because France is in the EU. Exactly. France can't do anything. They're stuck in the EU.
I mean, that is exactly correct. I mean, the great irony of all of this is, of course, that the French largely created the EU. I mean, it was very much initially their construction. People like Jean Monnet, for example, thought, you know, how do we make France a great power? We build up the EU system. France will, of course, be the leader, and that will give us the sort of weight, the geopolitical weight against the great powers. And in fact, what the French were doing is they were building their own prison, because that's what the EU has actually turned out to be.
Yeah. Rich says that Japan has an industrial base that no Euro country, and to some extent even the US, can compare to. They have their own stealth fighters, Shinshin X2 Mitsubishi, 100% Japanese, when Europe has to gather countries to do the same.
Oh, absolutely. And to be absolutely clear about this, if Japan decides to go nuclear, it can do so probably within months. I mean, and they can certainly build their own nuclear submarines and, you know, strategic missiles. They have all that capability and all that technology, and they can do it very fast. And of course, that would be a dramatic shift in the balance of power in the Pacific. It would alarm and frighten China. It would alarm and frighten a lot of the other Asian states. By the way, I'm not sure what the Americans would make of it. I mean, it would make Japan less dependent on the United States also. And of course, it would mean the end of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. I mean, it's already perhaps in a weakened condition, but it would effectively be destroyed. And think about the implications of that. It would then mean, for example, if Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty ends, the Russians can share not just missile technology and all that sort of thing, but nuclear technology with China too. So, I mean, you know, the thing just begins to become very, very disturbing. And that's putting it mildly.
Yeah, the English loyalist says, do you find it funny that Milley accuses Trump of trying to start a war with China, and in the meantime, Milley is pushing for a new war against China? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think you've got it exactly right. I mean, Milley, how to say this in a measured way? I mean, what he has done is so off any understanding I have of how a military officer can behave, that, I mean, it's made me think that we are much closer to a military dictatorship in the United States than even I had imagined, to be honest. I mean, the only thing I can say is this general, I mean, he's closer to a Dr. Strangelove figure. What was the name of the general in that film? General Ripper, or whatever his name was. Yeah. I mean, he's closer to being that than any general I can ever imagine. I mean, I never thought that would happen in the United States. I mean, he disobeys, or rather he circumvents his commander-in-chief. He tells the other side, the commander-in-chief is not to be listened to. He's busy at the same time, essentially countermanding the commander-in-chief's orders and blocking withdrawals from Afghanistan. I mean, it's just, he completely overrides the chain of command. And he thinks that's fine because he's reporting to something he calls the interagency. Well, I mean, if anybody is concerned about the state of American democracy, well, this incident, as I said, has exposed the reality like nothing else.
Yeah. Violin Merchant says that Facebook glasses have more computing power than the Manhattan Project. Facebook glasses will not succeed, but definitely a laptop or an iPad. That's for sure.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I mean, all the hard work that Oppenheimer and co used to have to do. I'm sure you could probably. I mean, a teenager could probably manage it on a laptop today. I mean, this is not a complicated technology. Everybody knows the science. I mean, the science is well known. It's now purely a matter of technique. And the tools to do it are now universally available. And that's the reality.
That's the reality. Yeah. Kurt Fromm says, great weekend to all from Switzerland. Great weekend to you, Kurt. Actually, here. There's my Switzerland hat from the Duran shop. And let's see. Simon says that the AUKUS is the Franco-German nightmare, an Anglosphere that sees the EU as irrelevant. Sir Humphrey would be proud. Job done.
Well, I'm sure that's true. And of course, that begs the question, what do the French and the Germans do? Well, we've talked about the French.
Nothing.
Nothing, probably. But I mean, I'm sure that's right. But if they sit back and think through their own position, then I think they would probably understand that, the policies they've been following at the moment is just obliterating their societies and their countries and are contrary to their own interests. They're very far from getting to that stage yet. As I said, Macron, Michel Barnier, Olaf Scholz. I mean, Armin Laschet. I mean, these are not serious people.
Yeah, I agree. Game over. That's everything, Alexander. We covered all the questions. We covered our topics. I think we got it all.
Well done. Well, as I said, I mean, I've said this so often in so many videos and so many live streams. This 2021 is the year the world changed. We're all going to be seeing this. Historians are going to be writing about it. And here we see the proof. I mean, another big event like AUKUS coming out of nowhere. I mean, this is a massive demographic shift. It is. Yeah. It's Britain leaving Europe, the United States focusing on China, Australia aligning itself, Chinese and the Russians probably converging, Japan thinking about what it's going to do, and Germany and France looking like they're a strategic backwater, because that's the reality now. That's the way the world shifts. The tectonic plates are changing, and Brussels, Berlin, Paris, they ought to be thinking hard, but of course they're not. At the moment, the European Parliament is debating the Russian elections, where it has absolutely no influence at all. Yeah. That tells you something.
The unelected EU is debating the elections in Russia. It's clown world. Anyway, all right. Guys, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you very much to everyone that joined us on this live stream. Thank you to everyone that was following us on the Duran.locals.com in the chat there, to everyone in the chat here on YT, to our awesome moderators. Thank you very much, guys, for all that you do. And thank you to the super chats and all the questions. Alexander, we'll end it here for the weekend. We had a big week in news. We had a live stream yesterday, a live stream today. I think we covered a lot of ground, and we'll have a lot more videos coming up this weekend. Any final thoughts, Alexander, as we head into the weekend on a very busy September?
I wonder what's coming next week, by the way. I'm glad we didn't discuss the non-event, which is the Durham indictment.
We'll do a video on that. It's so disappointing that it's unexpected.
Exactly.
5 years of lies, and what did we get? nothing.
And what do we get?
And Durham doesn't exist.
And Duran doesn't exist, exactly. So,
Yeah.
but if you want to take on that, well, as I said, we'll be probably doing a video about it on Monday. But
yeah, I think you have a video coming up. Do you have a video coming up on that as well?
On locals, on not.
Okay, yeah. So check us out, theduran.locals.com, everybody. Thank you very much. Have a great weekend. What a week. Oh boy, what a week. I know I'm going to rest a bunch this week, Alex.
So am I. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. We'll leave it there. Let me just make sure I got all the questions here. Yeah, I got everything. All right. Take care, everybody. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.